Hello, 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 hello. Sorry about the delay, lads. It's a bit late in the day. It's about 5 o'clock in the evening. I usually get these up a lot earlier, but between doing a delivery this morning, swimming in the lake, and recording another podcast, I just haven't had the time on top of a fucking job and everything else. You know yourself. So my guest earlier on today was Juliana Pena, the first lady on the show. Thank fuck, got that monkey off me back. I won't be uploading that today because I only uploaded Anthony Murphy's second installment this morning, so I'll probably hold on to Juliana's for a couple of days just to give myself a little bit of breathing space. But I digress. How are you getting on with your 40-day challenges? I'm hearing from a lot of lads that are doing push-ups, and that's so fucking cool, it's unbelievable. Yeah, I can't stress how cool it is to hear from people that are basically fucking getting up and getting after it and doing something, because if you want to, I don't know, there's something about this time of year that just it's just really ripe for kind of spring cleaning your life, without sounding too pretentious about it. But there's something in that. There's something about the stretch in the evenings, you know, the buds on the trees, and again, without making anybody violently ill, if you can think of yourself as something that's only budding. You know, this is it's the start of the fucking year, lads. So if you want to get motivated and make change of your life, if you want to maybe do something that you've been meaning to do, or whatever the fuck it is, set yourself the goal of having done something by a certain date. Don't say this time next year you'll, you know, have done what you want to do. Say this time next year you'll have done what you want to do, but in order for that to happen, these 10 things need to happen first. And I can't do this before I do that, and I can't do this before I do that, so I'm going to have this done first. What's the fucking timeline? Is it, can you do it by next week? Can you say to yourself, right, I'll do a little bit of it maybe today or tomorrow or at the weekend? Set yourself some fucking goals and get the fuck after it. Anyway, what I want to talk to you about today was inspired in part by what came up at the end of my conversation with Anthony last night, the podcast that went live this morning, Anthony Murphy 2, call it. And I mentioned something to Anthony. Actually, no, I don't think I did. It was in the blurb that I wrote. So I was sharing the link to Anthony's Patreon account. And I said something along the lines of, if you're embodying the off-the-lead mentality, that it's incumbent on you, if you can, obviously, if you can support him, to support him. The idea being that you should spend your money on what you want to see more of in the world. And that, I think, is what I want to maybe dwell on for at least the start of this podcast, and maybe the whole thing. Another way of looking at that is every time you spend your money, you vote for the type of world that you want to live in. Think about that now. Every time that you spend your money, every single fucking time you spend your money, you're voting to have more of that in this world. So if you're fundamentally opposed to factory farming, if you think it's abhorrent, if you think it's evil, don't buy your fucking vacuum packed meat out of the cheapest section in the fucking Tesco fridge or freezer aisle. Don't be eating in McDonald's. Don't be eating in any fast food restaurant. Don't be buying pre-prepared meals. Because put it this way, where's the best beef in these two scenarios? Is it in your local butcher's display, or is it behind about 4 layers of packaging on a shelf in a supermarket? Think about this. You're not a farmer, because farmers these days don't kill their own animals. You own a slaughterhouse. So you own a killing building, basically. And you buy live cattle or pigs or chickens or whatever it is. You buy them from the farmers in your vicinity. You pay them whatever it is. You burn off the hair, skin the animal, chop it up into quarters or whatever it is. And then you take your prime cuts, so all the best bits of meat. They get put to one side, and they go to the best of the best, go to the high-end butchers and the high-end restaurants. After that, then, this kind of not as good stuff probably goes, the majority of it goes to the supermarkets. But then the shit that's left over, that stuff gets all mushed up together with the nose and the foreskin and the God knows what else in between, mixed up into a big grinder and put somewhere where you can't really see it, like in a lasagna or in a meatball or in, a big kebab stick that you see spinning in a takeaway at 4 o'clock in the morning when you've fallen piss drunk out of your head out of a nightclub. That's where all that meat goes, all that nasty stuff, the stuff that's scraped up off the floor of the factory and extruded through a pipe. That's where that stuff ends up. So the more of that you want to see, the more of that you should buy. Because again, every time you spend your money on something, you're voting in favour of seeing more of the same. Now, the antidote to that is to spend money on what you do want to see more of. So think about that for a second. What is it that you would like to see more of? People have said what I do is fantastic. What I do is I created a small business and I work my ass off and I get I get paid by my customers, and it costs me less to buy the materials than it does to sell the produce. I make a profit. That profit is my wages, and people love that, and I love it. But when I tell people, or when people ask, what do you do for a living, and you explain to them what you do, and they say, Jesus, and you do this all by yourself, and you say, yeah, well, I get people in to help me on my busier days and that, but that I'm steering my own ship. People love that, and I think that's like I know I love it. I love seeing it, and I love hearing it, and I love having McGrain's Butchers in Navan, because I know the McGrains are a local family. They're not the equivalent of, it's not McDonald's Meats or, some big huge fucking brand that's has 100 million cows rammed into a 20 square foot shed, and then they get pushed through a big blender and, a Big Mac comes out the other side of it. Not in the slightest. They're a family butchers. They're a family, a local family, community people doing essentially what I do. Buying in local produce, adding a certain amount of work to it, and then selling it back to the locality for a profit, and that's where their wage comes. And you can extrapolate that ad nauseum for where you buy your eggs, where you buy your spuds. Like, Jesus, lads, whatever about, if you can't buy local, that's one thing. But fuck me, buy Irish. Buy fucking Irish. I mean, and look, be aware, like when you're in Lidl or Aldi or Tesco or whatever supermarket is in your locality, take the time to have a look at the labels. Because it should be on it. By law, as far as I know, it has to be on it, where this stuff comes from. And when you pick up a packet of onions or something like that, and you see produce of France, or you pick up a packet of potatoes and you see, produce of fucking Egypt, don't buy that shit. Because every time that you buy that stuff, again, like what I said earlier, you are voting for more of it. And like most of my conversations that I'm having with myself and with others, it always seems to boil back to this idea of awareness. Just opening your fucking eyes and being aware of what's around you, being aware of what you're eating, where it comes from, what it's doing to you, what it's doing to our society, what the negative impacts are on your health and on your environment, and what the positive impacts are on your health and on the environment and on your pocket. And I think there's a quote that I'm a fan of, me that loves me quotes. I think it's a Gandhi quote, and it's be the change that you want to see in the world. That's 2 take-home quotes from today's podcast. Be the change that you want to see in the world, and every time you spend your money, you're voting for the type of world that you want to live in. And I suppose the take-home point here is that you're the one in charge. You're the one making the decisions. You are society. Each and every one of us are society. We all have to do our bit. This idea of, hoping that the world will change or wishing things were better, bollocks. Embody the change that you want to see happening. So moving away from that and back onto my conversation that I had with Anthony last night, I left 2 things out in the dragon, when we were talking about the dragon. I can't remember the name. I think it was the Magda was the, I suppose, mythical monster in Irish mythology. I think it was the Magda. And it was like a top apex predator type monster character. Maybe something akin to a dragon. And as far as I'm aware, dragons are synonymous with myths worldwide. And the explanation of that I've heard from, I think it was Jordan Peterson, is that dragons are the embodiment of our most innate base instinct fears. So when we were early hominids or early primates or pre-humans or proto-humans or whatever we were before we were Homo sapiens, and even indeed before then, our main fears were snakes, predatory birds, and big cats. So if you imagine a combination of the three of those animals, a combination between a snake, an eagle, say, and a lion, you're getting very close to what might look like a dragon. Something that could fly and swoop down and pick you up in either its talons or its big lion-like claws. Something that was like a snake, so it could slither in amongst the trees undetected. They also breathe fire. And again, fire would have been a terrifying thing to our primordial ancestors. Every animal, as far as I'm aware, is instinctively afraid of fire. And with good fucking reason. Because if you weren't, you didn't survive. In dragon mythology, dragons often hoarded gold. Or if there wasn't gold in the area of the particular myth, there was whatever treasure, or maybe wisdom. So the stereotypical, archetypal hero story is the young man goes out and fights the dragon and slays the dragon and gets the pot of gold. And I think that the analogy there is that you have to go forth and face your inner demons. And in doing so, you reap the benefits. Another thing that we mentioned was, or I mentioned, should I say, or butchered, more to the point, was the 5 personality traits. The big 5 personality traits. Namely, and these are the ones that I fucked up on last night, and I'm going to fucking throw a spanner in the works here and fuck them up on myself again. Neuroticism, openness, agreeableness, orderliness, and I'll get back to the 5th. Neuroticism is essentially our sensitivity to negative emotion. Openness is essentially how open you are. It's kind of self-explanatory. When you think of somebody who is a very open person, if you think of the person, if you ask them what did they have in their bank account, the type of person that's likely to just tell you is a very open person. The type of person that wouldn't tell you in a million fucking years is probably a closed person. Now that's obviously a stark example, but we all know people who are kind of very secretive and wouldn't fucking tell you anything. They're not open. They're quite a closed person. And then there's people who, you know, would tell you what they ate for breakfast if you only asked them. So that's openness and neuroticism. Agreeableness is another one. So, and plus, one thing worth mentioning, there's 2 sides to each of the big 5 personality traits, of which we all have. We all have these 5 personality traits to varying degrees. So, with neuroticism, which I said is your sensitivity to negative emotion, some people, if you say boo to them, you'll ruin their fucking day, or week, or life maybe. And they're super sensitive to that kind of thing. So they would be high in neuroticism. Whereas some people, it doesn't matter what you say about them or to them, water off a duck's back. Low in negative emotion, low in trait, neuroticism. Agreeableness then. Agreeable, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's how agreeable you are, and the opposite being how disagreeable you are. And the classic example is if you've ever been with your mates and you're ringing a takeaway, and you turn to, maybe it's your partner, and you say, hey babe, I'm going to ring a takeaway, what do you want? And they say, oh, I don't know, what do you want? Somebody who comes up with that kind of an answer is an agreeable person. Because a disagreeable person won't say that. A disagreeable person will say, we're getting a Chinese because I want a Chinese, and I know you don't like Chinese, but I want a Chinese. Now that's obviously an exaggeration, but you get the sentiment. So that's what neuroticism, agreeableness, extroversion is another one. So how extroverted or introverted, say, you are. How extroverted essentially is how outgoing you are in a sense, or how much of a people person you are, I think is more to the point. I'm not overly extroverted. So the way you'll spot me at a wedding is I'm in the far corner engrossed in conversation with someone. That will be an introverted characteristic. An extroverted characteristic is the person who's going table from table going, come on, get up, we go for a dance, how are you, boy? Yep, yep, yo. You know, they're the centre of attention, the life and soul of the party. Extroverted people need people around them in order to feel good. And introverted people need time the fuck away from most people a lot of the time in order to feel good. The fifth then being conscientiousness. How orderly you are, I suppose, and how regimented you are. And the way you'll spot a conscientious person is essentially how hard-working they are. If you know somebody who's flat fucking out every day doing this, and then when they're doing this, they're in the middle of doing that, and they've got a half a dozen different projects on all the time, and they're go, and they're super organised, and they just get work done, and are the embodiment of this idea that if you want something done, ask a busy person. That person is a conscientious person. So that's the big 5 personality traits. There's, you know, the kind of positive and not the positive and negative side, but there's 2 elements to each one of them. So to run through them quickly: neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness. If you Google big 5 personality traits, or better still, I'll include a link in the description of this to Jordan Peterson's own one. There is a cost involved. It could be as much as a tenner. I don't think it's any more than that. I highly recommend that if you've got any interest in psychology, and even more to the point, if you've got any interest in the type of person that you are, I highly recommend that you fill this out and really study the results, because you'd be very surprised what you could learn about yourself. And another thing to think of is maybe Google what they are, what the big 5 personality traits are, and try and rate yourself, you know, out of 10 on how, let's say, high in neuroticism, you know, 0 being not very high and 10 being as high as it gets. Rate yourself on each one of them. So get a rudimentary understanding of what each one represents, and rate yourself out of 10 to see how much or less of each one of them you are. Then do the test. Because one thing that I was surprised, now I didn't do what I'm recommending you do, and I can't really go back and redo it, because once you've done it, and once you've read your results, you've a bias that can't be accounted for by doing it a second time, I don't think. But for those who haven't already done it, rate yourself out of 10, and the idea being that you can then compare what you thought you were to what you are. And one thing that I discovered was that I would have considered myself high in neuroticism. I thought that I was high in negative emotion. Now, that's partly due because I thought that neuroticism was how in your own head you are, and I would tend to be very much so in my own head. But that's not that is it to a degree, but describing it as how sensitive you are to negative emotion is a better way of looking at it. But anyway, I thought that I would have been high in a sensitivity to negative emotion, given my history with depression and suicidal ideation and all the rest of it. But I was in a very low percentile. So I think I can't remember offhand, but let's say I was in the 20th percentile. That means out of 10,000 people that this study was based on, out of 100 of them, on average, I wouldn't have been as high in neuroticism as 80 out of the 100. I was in the bottom 20 of the random 100. And I kind of read that and went, that can't be right. That's bollocks. I'm surely more sensitive to negative emotion than, say, the majority of people. I couldn't be that far away from other people. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to realise that doesn't make me any less sensitive to negative emotion, having a low score. That just means that most other people are more sensitive to it than I am. And that was a real fucking eye-opener for me. So maybe that's the eye-opener that you'll get. Maybe it'll be something else. Maybe you won't get an eye-opener. But I highly recommend that you take the test and see and go down that big 5 personality trait rabbit hole. Because again, being aware of these things can change your life. Now, between the delivery at 4 o'clock this morning, editing and uploading Anthony's podcast, doing the podcast with Juliana, doing a day's work, getting a swim in, having to be home,